All right. Well, another great day at the hub. My name is Craig Avery, and we had a good friend just walked in to say hello and see what's going on. And I always kid this guy because he and my partner Chris Steinoff just wrote this book, Niagara Falls 1850 to 2000. Now I get the 2000 part, didn't it, Chris? Yay! But I'll tell you, lately I've been just saying I think we should have bumper stickers saying Niagara Falls living in the past. Personally, I'm hearing too much about this, how it used to be, and not how we can make it. So that, having said that, Paul, you must agree that we're going to have you called the future visionary as opposed to a historian. Well, what do you think?
Believe it or not, there is a gold mine here. I mean gold mine. It's so much gold, you just don't know what you can do with it all. And it's been ignored ever since this place was settled in the 19th century. And it's called history. The history of this place is the richest thing that's ever happened here and ever could happen. The problem is people have ignored it, have erased it and ignored it, thinking that everything else was more important than our history. And so little by little, generation after generation, its focus has decreased. We've removed a lot of the structures that were important to our past, and very few people, when they come to visit, see anything from the past that's worth seeing.
But you do see the historic districts and things like that. Is that just too little too late, in your opinion? Or?
Well, what's the most important structures are gone. For example, how many cities would tear down their first house? The first house built in the city. Well, we did in 1933. In March of 1933, the Augustus Porter's house on Buffalo Avenue, near the bridge to Goat Island, was torn down. And the contractors who were hired said, "Why are we doing this? The place is in perfect condition. Why not save it?" No one cared. The state didn't want to preserve it, and the Niagara Falls Historical Society, because of the Depression going on, had no money to save it.
The first house. All right? All right, so now wait. Make this clear to me. There was no houses.
No.
Anywhere. Why would this guy want to live here? What was his...
because he had plans. Augustus Porter had plans on using the water power to build mills and make those mills profitable.
And what year was this?
1805.
And how did he get here?
How did he get here?
Yeah.
He traveled through the forest on the trails just like everyone else did in those days. Horseback. And this was the wilderness here.
And
this was the wilderness.
Oh, wow. And he wanted to build a house, he said.
And so he stayed in the ruins of Fort Schlosser in Stedman's Place from 1805 until 1808, when his house that he was building, a brick house, was finished. The brick was made using materials from Lewiston, and the wood was all from the local forest. Beautiful Georgian mansion, and in the back of the house had a porch that went the entire width of the house, so he could sit on the porch and look at his rapids, his island, which in 1816 he bought, we call Goat Island. So he put a bridge up in 1817 so he could walk to his island from his house and take walks and enjoy it. And so he made a bridge. So this was his property. But then, of course, he started inviting people to come up here to enjoy the water power. He made a mill, then he made another mill, and then people started coming up here and settling, making mills and businesses, and little by little a village started growing by the falls. And by the time that the War of 1812 broke out, there were hundreds of people living there, and he called it Manchester, not Niagara Falls, because he wanted it to be like the industrial city in England, Manchester. Industry, industry. Tourism was the last thing on his mind. Industry, industry. And of course, controlling the portage was also important, because this was the way of taking goods to the forts that the new United States had west of here, like at Detroit and in the Ohio Valley. Everything had to pass through here. And so he controlled, he and his brother Peter, the portage, the road that carried things. And so that became very profitable, so profitable that they built some ships to use in the upper lakes to carry goods too. So the Porter Barton and Company portage business grew and grew and grew. In the meantime, the Canadians had their own portage on their side, And the two of them were competing for business. And the Porters didn't like that. So Peter ended up in Congress as a congressman from the area, and he was a hawk. And
So how could he be a congressman when there was only one house?
no, the congressman of the region of the state.
Oh, okay. All right. So I get back to this one house idea.
Well,
What
it
year are we
started-
in now? Then it started, right?
It
People
started in
building houses.
1808 with a Porter's house.
When did he get neighbors?
They started coming right after that.
Wow. And then he started having problems because the neighbors come in, right? The guy
No.
puts a fence up too close, or the
What-
tree is
what-
hanging
what do
over, the
peop- what
apples
do-
are dropping in the
What
yard.
do people
Holy
need?
cow.
What's one of the first things people need when a community is starting out? They need a place to go and stay if you're visiting. So a hotel
Hotel.
was established. Then you need a place to go to have fun with the guys.
A bar.
A tavern was established. And then you had, eventually when there were a few hundred people living in the village, working at the mills and the tavern and the hotel, you needed a place for kids to go to school. So a school had to be built.
Then
So
a
little-
landfill. Then landfills are needed. So you got
Well,
garbage.
You know, garbage was put directly into the river. And
Well, that's wrong.
pollution of the Niagara River was a problem from the very
There you
beginning.
go. See?
But the village grew and grew and grew and became Manchester. Then in 1848, they made it Niagara Falls because they discovered that people were actually traveling here, not just to do business, but they wanted to see the falls. They should just do business here.
But somehow we just skipped over the War of 1812. How did that affect him? With
Well, the
his
War of
house?
1812 put a damper on things for 3 years. And
Was he a little nervous sitting
Well,
right
he
there
had to
where he
flee,
was?
and his family had to flee. His house was burned.
It was brick.
In 1813, in the inside was all wood. You know that. The frame was all
the
wood.
Indians made the. Oh, I thought you said the inside. I thought you said the Indian side was all wood.
No, the inside. You're being nasty.
No. I'm just concerned about this guy.
In,
He had no
in
neighbors
December,
for a
in
while.
December of 1813, the British and their Indian allies came here, and in retaliation for our burning Newark, which is Niagara-on-the-Lake, that month, in December of 1813, they burned Lewiston, they burned Manchester, they burned Buffalo, and every farm and every place they possibly could along the Niagara River. They came over and retaliated. And so when Porter heard that they were coming, told his wife and kids, get the hell out of here. So they got on a sleigh, and they went to Canandaigua, where they had a family.
Wow.
So the house was burned, and for a couple years, it just lay there in ashes. And people were reluctant to come back after the war ended in 1814. But they started coming back and settling again and rebuilding. And Augustus didn't rebuild his house, didn't come back from Canandaigua until 1818.
But he still owned that.
He still owned the property. He owned a lot of property, he and his brother Peter. And so his brother Peter was living in Black Rock, which is near Buffalo. It was a separate village. But then he moved to Niagara Falls too and built a house. So you started having more and more people and more industry, and the city grew with industry in mind, not with tourism, not with history, of
He
course.
kicked in the power. He was the first one to really take advantage of the power.
Use the water power. Remember, in those days, it was just the water power,
yeah.
spinning the wheels. There was no electricity.
Right.
That didn't happen until much later.
So you had to be established close to the river to take advantage of
Of
that,
course,
that
yes,
power.
yes. And so they advertised in newspapers along the East Coast and Connecticut and other places. Anybody who wants to invest in mills and water power, come to Niagara Falls. And so little by little, industries started growing and growing and growing and popping up more and more. They built a canal from the upper river right to the gorge, and then they split it up into branches, and they put mills right along the top of the gorge. Gaskill was the first to build a mill there, a flour mill. And so all kinds of mills lined the top of the gorge from just below the north. And it was ugly. We have a picture of that in here, in our book. And but that was considered progress. That was the thing to do. Not to preserve the natural beauty of the falls, but to use it. Use it as much as you could. So by the middle of the 19th century, people who believed in trying to preserve the falls saw that we were destroying it. So a movement was formed called the Free Niagara Movement, and it ended up saving the falls from further destruction by removing all that stuff and creating the park.
Well, certainly there's lots of history, and before we go into a real-time version of the description, I just want to get back to my point saying, do we really have to live in the past?
No.
How can we preserve some of these things, and how can we move forward? How can we look forward to progressing in a certain neighborhood and not worrying about tearing down a house that suits no one?
Well, there are very, very few things left in the city worth
Right,
saving.
so we don't have to worry about
Don't
that.
have to worry about that. Very,
All
very
right.
few things. And the only things I'd like to see rebuilt, because of their importance to not just history of the region here, but world history, are Stedman's house up to the old stone chimney and Augustus Porter's house. Those are the only two. And I would like to see someplace down below the escarpment, preferably in Joe Davis State Park, a replica of a Haudenosaunee or Iroquois village where people can go and see how life was here before. Now, they won't be living in the past, but they'll be portraying it. And
that's
people are interested in
Yeah.
that, and they want
Yeah.
to see things like that. And of course, Old Fort Niagara is already a jewel, it's a gem, but
Mhm.
let's make other things to complement it along the way. In the city of Niagara Falls, talking about industry, was the place where electric power, the usage of electric power began.
Yeah.
Alternating current with Nikola Tesla's ideas began here with the Dean Adams power plant, of which only the transformer house is left. Well, let's make a museum out of that, showing how the history of hydroelectric power. It began here. We're not living in the past, but we're
Sure.
showing why things are the way they are today because of what happened there. It happened here. All the electrochemical industries began here. You've got the Carborundum office building on Buffalo Avenue, which is practically empty now. Beautiful building. Why not make that into a museum of the history of the electrochemical industries? Because this is where they started. When you take out plastic, all those chemicals started here.
Right.
The things we have in our homes were all
But in
into
those days when they developed those factories and that industry, wasn't there a Paul Gromosiak back then saying, wait a second, we can't have this new industry, we have to think about the fur trade back here?
No, there weren't any people. There was an historical society here.
But you know what I'm saying? If they stopped that back then, like we're trying to stop progress here,
Well, progress is a personal term to people.
okay.
Some people don't look at it the same way as others. But these things would have happened some other place, if not here. But it's a shame that the Niagara River shoreline has been reduced now to nothing more than a highway and industry.
Mhm.
And when there's so much we could have done to focus on what made us so special and how the world treated us. The natural history alone of the gorge, for example.
Sure. That's
People
right.
people just don't understand how neat it was. I know the natural history very well, and I've written about it. When the falls moved from Lewiston during the past 12,300 years, it moved in stages, and sometimes there were 2 falls, sometimes 3, sometimes 1. And for the past 12,300 years, the same period of time that human civilization has developed, the two paralleled each other. So what we could do along the top of the gorge is show people from the world, and that's who's coming here, how the falls history goes with the history of
Sure.
mankind.
Sure.
When farming began, when settling in villages began,
Mm-hmm.
when cities began, when the wheel was used, so on. The falls was here.
Great.
The falls was here. When Christ was born, the falls was here.
Yeah, well, that'd be super.
When Muhammad was born, the falls was here.
Those are easy things to do.
Easy to
Very
do.
easy.
But we haven't done it.
Right.
So what have you got? You got a parkway that goes and used to take you 55 miles an hour or faster to see the gorge in 2 seconds, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way to enjoy it.
No.
It has a
I agree
story
with that.
that has to. We should know.
Right. And you're going to be a regular contributor to the Hub, telling that story. Is that right? You're going to start writing for us, or what?
I am. Yes.
All right. Cool. All right.
I started with
So
the
before we get into 20 more centuries of discussion, we're going to hear about it from Paul in writing. and once in a while, in a nice lively discussion about history versus future. And I thank you for taking this time. This is cool.
But you notice I'm not living in the past.
All right. Well, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about.
I am very, very selective about what I do accept.
All right.
I think we all should be.
Yeah.
I think people too readily accept things in their lives, such as technology. I had an uncle when I was a boy, my Uncle Pete, my favorite uncle, who had no telephone in his house. And everyone used to laugh at him, the neighbors, the family, because he didn't want one. And he lived his whole life without a telephone in his house and was quite happy. If people only would have left him alone. He was a very nice guy, if you got to know him, but people thought he was something strange about him because he didn't have a telephone in his house. Well, I don't have a cell phone, and I don't have a computer, and if you don't like it, lump it.
And with that, and the Polish heritage that you have,
I'm half
there's
Polish.
a guy you didn't know, Alexander Graham Belsky. Who was he?
You are making fun
Who
of
was he?
Polish
No. Who was Alexander Graham Belsky? Do you remember him?
There's no Belsky.
He was the first telephone pole. See you later.
God.